Welcome to the Coaching Revealed podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Austin Matzel. In this episode, Institute of Coaching Director of Education, Pamela Larde, interviews Joel DiGirolamo, Vice President of Research and Data Science for the International Coaching Federation. With over 50,000 coaches in over 140 countries, Joel leads a research team whose mission is to understand how coaching actually works and where it's going. Like many in the coaching field, Joel's path to coaching, and for him, specifically coaching research, includes multiple industries and professions. He studied electrical engineering at Purdue and then spent decades at IBM across research, finance, strategy, and software, and then found his way to the ICF. But as Joel and Pam discuss, it turns out he was always heading there, to the intersection of science, human behavior, and the question of how people grow. We explore two major research findings from Joel's work. The first is a landmark study on managers and leaders using coaching skills, which revealed that coaching skills don't stay in the coaching conversation. They transform all dialogue. The second is a 42-coach qualitative study across multiple coaching specialties. This episode closes with Joel and Pam looking ahead at the ICF core competency update process, the role of AI and technology, and Joel's prediction that well-being and fulfillment are becoming the true North Star for where coaching is going. Thank you for tuning into Coaching Revealed. And now, our conversation with Joel DiGirolamo and Pamela Larde.
All right. Well, hello. I'm really excited about today's conversation. So to introduce my guest today, Joel DiGirolamo is the Vice President of Research and Data Science for the International Coach Federation, as we all know, the ICF, a professional organization of over 50,000 coaches in 156 countries. Now, Joel leads a research team whose goals are to advance the understanding of how coaching works and to understand how coaching is evolving and enhancing society. Robust research is the foundation of tools that can be used to build high-performing organizations, and Joel is passionate about developing innovative and robust research that will provide this foundation for continued exploration. And I'll just add that he has more than 30 years of staff and management experience in Fortune 500 companies and is the author of 2 books and just very much immersed in the world of coaching and psychology and leadership. And so really personally excited to talk to you. I know we've had conversations around joy, and I've archived those conversations, believe it or not, and I refer to them often because we had a great text exchange or email exchange on that. So you're a reference for me in a lot of ways. So thank you and welcome. It's so good to see you, Joel.
Well, good to see you again, Pamela, and thanks for having me here. Really appreciate it.
Yes, yeah, and we, I hope to cover, the work that you're doing and the research we've talked about, but I also want to get to know you. We see the academic, the intellectual, the leadership side of you, but who was the young Joel, the teenager Joel? Tell us a little bit about who he is and how that, how much of that still exists.
Oh my gosh, that's just that's a big question, Pamela.
Yeah.
Let me see what I can do with it. I have been curious my whole life. So the curiosity is really a key component of what I do and, kind of where I come from and where I go. I was always exploring. I grew up in a little wooded area of a suburban small town, and I was always exploring out there what was going on with the plants, with the trees. And so I was a tree hugger from day one. It's really quite fascinating because as I started to get older, got in high school and wondered, okay, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? I began to think about, well, what should I do? And I remember my dad was a manager of a manufacturing plant, electronics manufacturing, actually. And he would come home and he would tell me about how these efficiency experts would come in and help them to construct the assembly lines better. And I was fascinated with that. I was like, wow, how do these people do that? And it's so cool because they're helping people. They can be more efficient. Well, okay. I said, okay, Dad, who are those people? How can I be one of them? I don't know. And I asked my high school counselor, who are these people? And she's like, I don't know. So I followed in my dad's footsteps and went into electrical engineering first. I think if I had known what an industrial and organizational psychologist was, I probably would have done that out of the box.
Mm, wow.
So I have the scientific side, but then I also, from my upbringing, being out in nature and everything, have sort of a spiritual side. And so that spiritual side seeps into the science, and I could go down that rabbit hole for quite a while, but when the spiritual parts kind of start emerging and seeping in, it's like, okay, how do I handle that in a rigorous scientific manner?
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating.
We learn eventually as we get more into science that almost anything can be studied with deep scientific rigor if we really zoom in on it, commit ourselves to it, and if it's a true interest. I know I find that really fascinating. So I appreciate you sharing that. And so now here you are, and you're with the ICF, and you're a scientist. And how do you then go from where you were earlier in your career and transitioning to where you are now? There's a lot of people all over the world who count on what you do at the ICF. So how did you get there? What's your journey there?
Well, so it's interesting because as I was in this job for a while doing some of the pure research, I asked myself, well, geez, how did I really get started in research? And I was going through some of my materials, cleaning things out, and I ran across two pretty sizable reports that I did. And they were research studies I did on loudspeakers when I was a senior in college at Purdue University. I really wanted to be in acoustics. And I was like, oh, yeah, I completely forgot about that. So I'd been doing research as an undergraduate. And then I got hired by IBM and I did research there, development of products, mostly in the electronic area. But I got an MBA along the way. And then I had many different careers. I did a little bit of acoustics work, but I did a lot of electronic development. I did electronic packaging with silicon chips, did some strategy work, finance work, business development work, managed a software team for a while. Ended up with a broad set of skills that I had picked up. I went out on my own for a while and I did some training, I did some coaching, and I saw this job with ICF come up about research, academic research. And I was really intrigued. I looked at I just happened across this job posting and I was like, I could do that. I could do that. I could do that. What was in the posting. And I saw it said ICF. I'm like, oh, those people are supposed to be pretty cool. And so then I looked a little further and I said, oh, it's in Lexington, Kentucky, where I already live. I'll just turn in an application. What the heck? Did a phone interview, did an in-person interview, got hired, obviously. And so I've been there almost 12 years now and have built up the academic research team. We also have an industry team that I have that was in existence. And then we have an internal data team as well that is modernizing all of our work, the data that we have. I feel like a kid in a candy shop in some ways.
I think that's intriguing. I can only imagine what it must be like. Just to kind of dive in just a little bit with one of the articles that I was able to review before we got here is looking at, it's titled An Exploration of Managers and Leaders Using Coaching Skills. And what's interesting about that is with my own work, I do coach training. I'm very familiar with ICF's policies and processes for accreditation because of that. And part of our work has been around, we actually call it from boss to coach. And the idea is that we want to help leaders at different capacities adopt coaching skills. And this article really got me thinking about sort of the pros and cons of that in terms of the approach and what outcomes you expect to get depending on how that's implemented and whether or not the person is even motivated to engage in coaching, or if they're just more bottom line, I'm motivated by numbers and a paycheck and not into the deeper meaning behind things. And I'm just curious about what are some of the most profound parts of that project of this paper that came out for you?
Yeah, that paper was and that study was really fascinating. It was a mixed method study. So we did some qualitative interviews of folks who taught coaching skills to managers and leaders. And then we interviewed managers and leaders who used coaching skills. And then we did a quantitative survey of team members. And so it was absolutely fascinating because we went into it thinking that the leaders would have like directive conversations about here's the project, here's what we want to do. And then they would shift and have side conversations with, okay, now we're having a coaching conversation.
Yes.
There'd be more questions. But it was absolutely fascinating because now we look at it and we're like, oh, well, duh. But at the time, it was new to us that once everybody, and I imagine you have experienced this yourself, that once you learn coaching skills, you use those coaching skills in all your conversations. And so now the way I like to refer to it is coaching skills enhance dialogue. And it can enhance dialogue anywhere, which is why we now have a coaching culture assessment for organizations that comes from a behavioral standpoint. As far as I know, it's the only one that does that. We're working on writing that paper up. Anyway, that paper that you're referring to has been very widely cited, very popular, much to my surprise. I just thought it'd just kind of land and people say, oh, okay, whatever. There were a couple things that were really profound, and that is there's a spectrum that we have of being directive to being participative. And if you take like an emergency situation, so guys driving the ambulances and coming up on the scene of a car accident, somebody's going to get out there and they're going to be directing, okay, get this, get that, let's do this with the person. There has to be somebody doing that because you have to be quick and efficient. On the flip side, if you're working with a team, you're working with an individual. So say you're working with the individual and you want to know how they're feeling about the project, what they think they can contribute the most, how they feel the project is going, where there might be changes to the project. You also want to know in terms of professional development for the individual, you want to know what are their personal and professional goals. As a good manager or leader, you want to help them achieve those goals. That's how you attract and retain good people. It's really interesting, the dichotomy, and it's a spectrum. There are places along there where you might be a little bit directive and you might be mainly participative and open and asking a lot of questions. There's another interesting aspect of this too, and that is that a conversation with a professional coach is meant to be formal. It's meant to be ethically informed and confidential. You have to have defined boundaries, often written boundaries of what you might disclose of part of the conversation and what won't be disclosed. And with a coaching conversation or any kind of conversation that you might use coaching skills inside an organization, you always have to remember that the manager leader is beholden to the organization. Something that is said, the manager leader might have to say, look, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to tell HR about this, or I'm going to have to tell our boss about this. So it's a little bit different.
And I'll just to kind of, for those who haven't read it, I'll give an example. So if you are engaging with your supervisor and you just happen to mention, I think I might want to take a year and travel to Europe. Like, what do you think? And you're just casually, kind of engaging because you have that level of trust with them. They still have responsibilities to the organization. And so that might be something that might get to HR later, that, well, I don't know, I think this person might not be around for the next year. So conversations that could happen in a coaching context might not be the best situation for a manager to engage with.
Absolutely.
And I get this example from a LinkedIn post. It's a real story that that someone cited, that's exactly what happened.
And maybe I have a different perspective on that. That my belief is, if that's what the person wants to do, fine. Help them do the best work they can till the day they hop on that airplane.
And that's because you have a coaching perspective.
Yeah. Because you're helping the individual. And, there's loyalty to the manager, there's loyalty to the organization. And by helping that individual, no matter how, you are building that loyalty. And they might get off the plane coming back after the year and say, hey, Joel, I'm interested in coming back. What do you got?
Right. So not to burn those bridges. And we think about burning bridges from the standpoint of the employee to the organization, but I think the organization has the same level of obligation or opportunity, really, to keep those lines open, because that might be exactly what happens.
Absolutely. And I've had that happen. I've had people leave and come back.
And that's, again, it says a lot about the level of safety that you may have provided for them to be willing to come back, because there are places many of us would never return to.
Yes. Well, Pamela, I want to focus on one word you said, and that is safety. There's so much in the literature about relationship and coaching relationship. But in some of our research that we did back in 2017, 2018, when we were doing the job analysis for the core competency update that happened in 2019, one thing we saw was that it's really about safety. How safe does the client feel to open up to the coach? And so that's really informed a lot of our work moving forward.
So then how do you negotiate that tension between the supervisor, leader, manager being that authority figure who does have some level of say over your paycheck and your existence at the company, and the level of safety that a coach is supposed to provide? How do those two dynamics work at the same time?
Well, the number one word that comes to mind is balance. You have to balance the needs of the individual, the team member, with the needs of the manager, of the project, of the team, and of the organization. And I believe fundamentally that as long as you are open, direct, and clear with that individual what the landscape is. And there are conversations that I have with people who might work for me, be on my team, that they're like, okay, I want this to stay between us. And I often will say, well, if something's HR related, then I might have to say something. There's always that, or they might say something. I'm like, okay, you're raising a red flag here. Before you go any further, we need to talk about this. And so I believe being genuine, authentic, honest, upfront, clear, that's the main thing.
Okay, so this sounds like a set of skills that, ironically, you work for an organization that trains people with coaching skills. So it sounds like a scope of skills that goes far beyond just the role of manager. Often people get the role of manager because they've worked their way up, they're loyal, they know how to do the skill set that's required. Are there places within organizations generally that teach the very skills that you just spoke of? The relational aspect, the trust building aspect. Coaching tends to do that, but do organizations do that outside of the lens of coaching?
Ready to advance your coaching practice? Join the Institute of Coaching and tap into the world's leading resource for coaching science and professional development. With over 4,000 members across 130 countries, the IOC offers invaluable networking opportunities with an elite global coaching community and innovative learning to broaden your knowledge and keep you at the forefront of coaching best practices. Engage in cutting-edge learning events with world-renowned coaching scholars, from webinars and seminars to discussion groups, research projects, and more. Try any membership free for 30 days. Use promo code IOC Podcast and visit instituteofcoaching.org/join to get started.
You read my bio. I was in corporate America for 30 years. And I think the organizations who do that are few and far between, sadly. I think it's two things. In psychology, we talk about state and trait. Trait, what you come into the world with. State, what you do based on your experiences that you've had and education to some extent. The thing is, You get back to the old theory back, what was it? Gosh, the 1850s or something, the great man theory about leadership, right? So that was all trait. And so the question is, can leadership be learned? I say absolutely. That, I talked about my dad. I watched him as he would walk through this manufacturing plant and he would talk to the people working the assembly line. He knew their children. He knew what was going on in their lives, and he could just be so personable and we might say charismatic. I'm going to take a little detour here, and I'm going to talk about my dad's negotiating skills. I watched him negotiate with people. He could be the most hard-nosed negotiator, and just in the most gentle way, and make you feel like it's a wonderful conversation, but really he's just trying to squeeze every little dime out of this salesperson. And so I try to emulate that and exemplify that. And it's being clear and direct, and being genuine. And a while back, my wife and we had to buy her a new car. So we went to buy a brand new car, and I'm negotiating with the sales guy, and he's holding his iPad, and he's like, okay, if I get you this deal, will you take it? I said, look, if you don't do that walk 3 times, I'm going to feel like I haven't done my job. I was clear, direct. I was calling him on his game, but I was doing it in a nicest way.
Right.
And we get done, and he said, this was actually pretty fun.
I love that, because it's a sense of relationship building. It's building trust, and the humor helps. And everybody's not good at that. So if you're listening and humor is not your thing, it's okay. But being able to pull different aspects of your personality, into these kinds of engagement, I think those things almost need to be taught, because sure, some people might have that natural knack to do it, but as you mentioned, most organizations out there aren't doing this. They're not focusing in on the relational skills, which often are called soft skills. But the way you just described that is everything but a soft skill. It's strategic. I would say it's ingenious to be able to figure out what it is about a person, you can connect with to get what you want out of it. And it is a teachable skill in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I like what you say, using the word connect, because when I talk to people, and again, this gets back to that word relationship, and it can be relationship in coaching. It can be the relationship, the manager and leader, and that sort of thing. The thing that I tell people about is, first I ask them, do you know about in-group and out-group bias? The thing is that we as Homo sapiens, our ancestors grew up in the savannah, in our tribe. If we were out there in the savannah and there was somebody walking toward us, we had to make a decision pretty quickly. Are they in our group or are they outside our group? And if they were outside our group and they were going to harm us and we didn't decide quickly, we might get taken out of the gene pool pretty quickly. So in-group, out-group bias is in our DNA, which is really, really unfortunate, because right now it's not helping us. And my feeling is we need to get rid of it. That is part of how do we make people feel safe with us. I feel like people make it too complicated. They're like, oh, I'm building relationship over 3 sessions or whatever. It's just a matter of working to get the other person to feel like they're in the same in-group with you. And so find something common. Find something that you both can relate to very closely within the first 2 or 3 minutes, and you might be friends for life.
It's so true. Absolutely. I mean, and I feel like that happened with you and I, even though we haven't had a lot of engagement since that time. But the way you engaged me about joy, it sealed the deal. I was like, oh yeah, we're connected for life. I mean, so you did that very quickly and easily, just in our first few interactions. So there's a lot of truth to that. But I do want to push back on one thing that you said, and that was on the in-group, out-group, and I wish we could get rid of it as well, but it is still very much a survival need for many groups. And as we see what's going on here in the United States right now, with the immigration pushback, and that's to put it lightly. Survival right now really is about in group, out group. Who can I trust? Who's going to come after me? Who is going to tell on me, or who's going to jeopardize my family? And so while it would be ideal, I wish we could get rid of it too. There are some groups for which they really can't afford it. We're almost in those times now where that you described in the savannah.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue with that at all, Pamela. I mean, there is absolutely a need to have our antennae up at times and to be concerned, and what do I need to do to feel safe? I'm speaking from the part of us as Homo sapiens that we all want the same stuff.
Yeah, the same basic survival, food, love, care.
Yeah, we want a decent job. We want a decent place to live. One thing I discovered pretty quickly when I started traveling the world, working for IBM, they're a global company, so I ended up traveling a lot of places. And I pretty quickly noticed that everybody wanted the same stuff. And I'm like, cool, this is pretty neat. I don't care what you look like or how you speak or what language, you use. It's all the same. And so I guess that's where I'm coming from. And how can we build the dialogue? And I'm all about dialogue. And that's where I think coaching skills can really help us as a global society.
And I had a hunch that that's where you were coming from, and I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit. but I wonder what kind of implications, and you just started to allude to that right now, but what kind of implications that has for coaching, and and considering some of the breakdowns in communication that are happening today, out in the social world, but also in the corporate world, in business. What is the role that coaches can play in helping people get what they basically want, and serving those basic needs?
Well, I want to reflect a little bit on a study that we did a couple of years ago. We're still writing up the paper, and this one I think will be popular. And what we did was we started out understanding how coaches work, like when they're in specialty coaching. So let's take agile coaching. That's been around for decades. And health and wellness coaching. We looked at sales coaching, business coaching, and sports coaching. And it was a qualitative study. We interviewed 42 coaches in these different fields and a few who had no coaching specialty. And we did all the usual rigorous stuff. We did the coding, 2 coders, and reconciled the codes and all that good stuff. And we saw 3 things. We saw that the vast majority of these coaches started out with the coaching skills, and they started out diving into the individual. What does the individual want? How are they motivated? What are they looking for? And, we often talk about what the client presents or comes in with is often not the same, not the real goal, right? So that's number 1. Number 2, the coach's job is to, in those specialties, is to provide some information or knowledge. We updated our core competencies last fall, and we added the word knowledge in one of the subcompetencies, that the coach may provide some information to the client to help them whatever they're ready for in that moment. And for the academics who might be listening, or people who know the academics, there's a fellow named Vygotsky. He came up with this idea called the zone of proximal development. And virtually all coaches use that technique, that whatever the client is ready for, so proximal, that whatever they're ready for, then that's what the coach will work with them on, whatever they think. And so the second finding was that the coaches bring in the knowledge whenever they feel the client is ready for it, a given piece of knowledge. Or take sports, the sports coach might say, okay, here's how you're batting. How about if over the next 3 weeks before we meet again, you try batting a little bit differently? Let's try doing it this way. And so that might be where that knowledge piece comes in. The third element is being able to move back and forth between these two in a very productive and skillful way. This kind of coaching takes a higher level skill, but it can be profoundly more effective. What this really drove home, the point this really drove home for us, was that the unique thing about coaching, the differentiator for coaching, professional coaching, I'm talking primarily here, that differentiator is that you're diving into what the client wants. What are their motivations? And so that's what we're kind of working on right now. Coaches out there, that's your differentiator. Training, they don't ask what your motivations are, right? I mean, they may go around the room, what do you want to get out of this session or what this workshop or week-long training and whatever, but they don't go into your individual motivations. And that's where I sometimes call coaching to be a one-to-one learning modality.
Oh my goodness. That resonates so much because I guess it's one of the techniques I've brought into my coaching, even before the knowledge piece came through last year. Now, I guess it's almost 2 years now. We're in 2026. But I've always wondered about that because, there's this idea of not directing too much and not, so really understanding where that line is. But as an educator, it comes really naturally to integrate that knowledge piece. Again, another skill set that I think if we take this into a workplace environment and you have a leader that's there are real opportunities for that knowledge piece to be effective coaching skills.
Absolutely. So yeah, it plays in there as well. And when you're asking an individual on the team, well, have you tried A, B, or C? And they might say, oh, I tried A, but I didn't know about B or C. And then they might go off and do it. Fundamentally the same thing.
Where's the line then between becoming too directive and offering that as a particular option?
Well, Pamela, that's a big question, right? Because there's so many parameters out there. And I admit, I personally lean more toward letting people maybe flounder a little bit because that's how they learn. And, I've had people come back to me. I might give them a book and say, here, learn about this, like Roche modeling techniques, and statistics and, go learn about this. And then, 2 weeks later, they might come back and like, I'm struggling with it, but that's okay. I personally lean more toward not giving as much. I might give, there are times I get in and say, look, okay, you've been working on this for 3 weeks. Here's what I'm seeing. How about if we do A, B, and C and move forward that way? And then it works or doesn't work.
I think people will be more receptive than not to suggestions or, ideas, offers to dive into something else, to learn more about it. I think, at least in my experience, I've seen where people are much more receptive to that than not, because some people come in wanting you to give them an answer anyway. But no, I really appreciate that. And I am curious about the updates to the core competencies, just kind of from a behind the stage standpoint. What drives these updates? Is there a process that publicly you don't mind sharing? And how is this informed by the state of the world? People are experiencing coaching. I have probably about 50 questions in that one question, but
well, let me answer in a fashion, and then if you want me to clarify or expand. We follow best practices where it's good to do a job analysis every 5 to 7 years. And so, we were at the 7-year mark, and we said it's time. That's one factor. Another factor is, like you say, looking at the practice. What are coaches doing out there, and has it shifted dramatically? And it hasn't shifted dramatically, but it has shifted, absolutely. We've got more technology, this idea of blending the knowledge with the coaching skill. There's definitely more of that out there, which I absolutely love. What we do is there's several of us trained as industrial and organizational psychologists. We learn job analysis skills. That's the heart, the foundation of IO psychology. We are very rigorous about those practices and the methods that we use, and we publish that. We're just about to get updated report on what we did this last go around for the update. That's about to be out on the website very, very soon. But the 2019 paper's out there, what we did previously. We know going in that we may have certain questions, like the idea about the blended coaching or specialty coaching. Going in, we knew that was going to be something we wanted to look at seriously.
And yet,
we also knew that we wanted to look at technology seriously. How much do people use AI with their clients or in their coaching practice? And so going in, we'll have those questions. We may do some exploratory work ahead of time. And then we work with the SMEs, subject matter experts, to review all the tasks. We add some tasks or knowledge domains. And then we do a big survey. We get over 1,000 people usually in that survey to understand what's most important. And then we take all that and we, to use a technical, fancy academic term, we mush it around and we talk to the SMEs in usually a 2-day workshop. And we say, here are all the questions we have for you. Let's start talking about these. And how important is this? What do you do in this? And then we get all that data. We go back to the rooms and we mush it around some more. We make some proposed changes. We review that with another set of SMEs, and out pops our new competency model. Or, we did team coaching, we did mentor coaching, we did supervision competencies. And so it's like each one is harder, but we follow a very rigorous process, and we want to be as rigorous as we possibly can and still get something out the door. That sometimes is the hard part.
That's the hard part is, because we love mushing things around. I mean, that's the fun part. If you were to predict, what's coming down the pike for coaching and new competencies might need to be played around with because of the direction of the world. We've got AI, we've got this, technology has always moved so quickly, and it feels like it's moving even more quickly. What might you predict is coming down the pike in terms of innovations in coaching and what coaches might need to know, skill sets we might need to adopt going forward?
I think coaches looking at the big picture is really, really important. We're working, there's a guy named J.D. Pincus who did some work on motivations to actions to well-being or outcomes or fulfillment. It's a model that we ourselves independently came up with out of that study with the coaching specialties. And then I came across JD's work and I was like, dang him. And he had that same model in there. And I emailed him, I'm like, JD, you're in trouble. But we had another great conversation. He's a fantastic guy. Anyway, I believe that there's going to be more emphasis on well-being, on satisfaction, fulfillment. And so this idea of how do coaches dig into what the motivations are of the client, get them to act, right? Get them to take some action to lead to some positive outcome. Fundamentally, that's the model. I like to make a lot of different simple models because to me, that's raise the efficacy.
I will say that big picture thinking is huge. I love that. I appreciate that because a client can come in and, as you said, it might not be the thing that they are ultimately looking to resolve. I want a promotion, but looking at the big picture and helping the client understand how the promotion adds to well-being, fulfillment, and all that, because the promotion can be something that actually diminishes their well-being if we look big picture. So I think that's profound. I love it. Anything else?
I don't think so, Pamela. I just want to say this has just been an absolutely delightful conversation. I always enjoyed chatting with you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Joel. I really appreciate this as well. And for those of you who are listening, we can make sure that you have access to the article that we discussed and how to follow and see what's going on, in Joel's world. But thank you again for joining us. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you, Joel. And I hope you all will have an amazing rest of the day.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Coaching Revealed, brought to you by the Institute of Coaching. You can learn more about the Institute on our website at instituteofcoaching.org. You can stay up to date with new episodes of our podcast by liking and following Coaching Revealed. You can also find us on social media on LinkedIn, Instagram, and X with the handle Institute of Coaching. We also love hearing from our guests, so please reach out to us with thoughts you have on this episode and any questions you have about coaching. Until next time, this is Emily Tarani with Coaching Revealed.